Oh, I need to stop. Hello, everyone. This is the 5th Epical Revelation Fellowship. And I'm Reverend Dr. Roger Paul. And tonight we are going to read paper 187, The Crucifixion. And that starts on page 2004 of the original book, or paper 187, 1.1 on the older books. And we'll say a little prayer and get started.
Dearest God, we thank you so much for us joining the going together tonight to study your word. Thank you so much for this revelation. It has changed our lives and changed our spirit as a result of our study group. In your name, Jesus Christ, my friend, and I will pray and give thanks for your life and for listening and for your presence.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay. This is a powerful paper we're going to read tonight, you know. If I can change this one here. Okay, paper 187, The Crucifixion. After the two brigands had been made ready, the soldiers, under the direction of a centurion, started for the scene of the crucifixion. The centurion in charge of these 12 soldiers was the same captain who had led forth the Roman soldiers the previous night to arrest Jesus in Gethsemane. It was the Roman custom to assign 4 soldiers for each person to be crucified. The two brigands were properly scourged before they were taken out to be crucified, but Jesus was given no further physical punishment. The captain undoubtedly thought he had already been sufficiently scourged even before his condemnation. Yeah, they treated him pretty bad. Okay, dear.
The two thieves crucified with Jesus were associates of
Barabbas.
And would later have been put to death with their leader if he had not been released as the Passover part of Pilate. Jesus was thus crucified in the place of Barabbas.
Pretty bad when the Son of God is crucified in the place of a murderer and thief, isn't it? Stephen.
Okay. What Jesus is now about to do, submit to death on the cross, he does of his own free will. In foretelling this experience, he said, "The Father loves and sustains me because I am willing to lay down my life, but I will take it up again. No one takes my life away from me. I lay it down on myself. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up. I have received such a commandment from my Father."
So he's telling us right here that it is he who will resurrect himself, not the angels, not celestial beings or anything else. It is he that will bring himself back to life. All right. All right. Millie.
It was just before 9 o'clock this morning when the soldiers led Jesus from the praetorium on the way to Golgotha. They were followed by many who secretly sympathized with Jesus, but most of this group of 200 or more were either his enemies or curious idlers who merely desired to enjoy the shock of witnessing a crucifixion. Only a few of the Jewish leaders went out to see Jesus die on the cross. Knowing that he had been turned over to the Roman soldiers by Pilate and that he was condemned to die, they busied themselves with their meeting in the temple, whereat they discussed what should be done with his followers.
All right. One, on the way to Golgotha. Before leaving the courtyard of the praetorium, the soldiers placed the crossbeam on Jesus' shoulders. It was custom to compel the condemned man to carry the crossbeam to the site of the crucifixion. Such a condemned man did not carry the whole cross, only the shorter timber. The longer and upright pieces of timber for the 3 crosses had already been transported to Golgotha, and by the time of the arrival of the soldiers and their prisoners, had been firmly implanted in the ground. So the pictures we see Jesus carrying the cross are all incorrect, right? He just carried the crossbeam. All right. Oh yeah, I mean, if anybody that's done construction knows, if you take a 6x6 that's even just 6 foot long and try to hoist it over your shoulders, it's very, very, very heavy. It's almost impossible to carry by yourself. Right?
According to custom, the captain led the procession, carrying small white boards on which had been written with charcoal names of the criminals and the nature of the crimes for which they had been condemned. The centurion had notices which gave their names, underneath which was written the one word, brigand. It was the custom, after the victim had been nailed to the crossbeam and hoisted up to its place on the upright timber, to nail this notice to the top of the cross, just above the head of the criminal. Now, witnesses might know for what crime the condemned man was crucified. The legend which the centurion carried to put on the cross of Jesus had been written by Pilate himself in Latin, Greek, Aramaic, and read, Jesus of Nazareth.
All right. And that's, if you watch any of these shows, that's what they talk about a lot, is that plaque that he put above his head. And whether the Catholic Church actually has that or not, they some of them claim to. Did we lose Millie there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Who's that? Me? Stephen? Stephen.
Oh, okay. Some of the Jewish authorities who were yet present when Pilate wrote this legend made vigorous protest against calling Jesus the King of the Jews. But Pilate reminded them that such an accusation was part of the charge which led to his condemnation. When the Jews saw they could not prevail upon Pilate to change his mind, they pleaded that at least it be modified to read, "He said, I am the King of the Jews." But Pilate was adamant. He would not alter the writing. To all further supplication, he only replied, "What I have written, I have written."
He stuck to his guns. That was good.
Yeah. Now, I have lots and lots of pictures tonight on interpretations of what actually happened there. And I'm just going to go through these and share them with you as we go. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them or anything. Millie, would you take the next one?
Ordinarily, it was the custom to journey to Golgotha by the longest road in order that a large number of persons might view the condemned criminal. But on this day, they went by the most direct route to the Damascus gate, which led out of the city to the north. And following this road, they soon arrived at Golgotha, the official crucifixion site of Jerusalem. Beyond Golgotha were the villas of the wealthy, and on the other side of the road were the tombs of many well-to-do Jews.
And that included Joseph of Arimathea, right? Okay, and Nicodemus. Right. All right. Crucifixion was not a Jewish mode of punishment, but both the Greeks and the Romans learned this method of execution from the Phoenicians. Even Herod, with all his cruelty, did not resort to crucifixion. The Romans never crucified a Roman citizen. Only slaves and subject peoples were subjected to this dishonorable mode of death. During the siege of Jerusalem, just 40 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, all of Golgotha was covered by thousands upon thousands of crosses, upon which from day to day there perished the flower of the Jewish race. A terrible harvest indeed of the seed sowing of this day. And y'all remember the story of, oh gosh, the slave. I can't remember his name, but at one time going into Rome, there were 500 crosses with Christians and slaves tacked to them all the way into Rome. 500. A horrible sight. Yeah. Okay. And this is hang on, this went backwards on me again. There. It's another interpretation of the crucifixion. This one's wrong too.
Mhm.
Okay.
As the death procession passed along the narrow streets of Jerusalem, many of the tender-hearted Jewish women who had heard Jesus' words of good cheer and compassion, and who knew of his life of loving ministry, could not refrain from weeping when they saw him being led forth to such
And noble.
noble death. He passed by, many of these women bewailed and lament, and some of them even dared to follow along by his side. The master turned his head towards them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not, but rather yourselves for your children. My work is about done. Soon I go to the Father. But the time of terrible trouble for Jews are just beginning. Behold, the days are coming in which you shall say, Blessed are the barren and those whose breasts never suckle with young. In those days you will pray the rocks of the hills to fall on you, in order that you may be delivered from the terrors of the enemies."
He's talking about the Romans taking over Jerusalem and leveling it, right? Steve.
Okay. These women of Jerusalem were indeed courageous to manifest sympathy for Jesus, for it was strictly against the law to show friendly feelings for one who was being led forth to crucifixion. It was permitted to rabble, to jeer, mock, and ridicule the condemned, but it was not allowed that any sympathy should be expressed. Though Jesus appreciated the manifestation of sympathy in this dark hour when his friends were in hiding, he did not want these kind-hearted women to incur the displeasures of the authority by daring to show compassion in his behalf. Even at such a time as this, Jesus thought little about himself, only of the terrible days of tragedy ahead for Jerusalem and the whole Jewish nation.
Always thinking of someone else, wasn't he? Millie.
As the master trudged along on the way to the crucifixion, he was very weary. He was nearly exhausted. He had had neither food nor water since the Last Supper at the home of Elijah Mark. Neither had he been permitted to enjoy one moment of sleep. In addition, there had been one hearing right after another up to the hour of his condemnation, not to mention the abusive scourging which with their accompanying physical suffering and loss of blood. Superimposed upon all of this was his extreme mental anguish, his acute spiritual tension, and a terrible feeling of human loneliness.
Suffered like no one else, didn't he? Shortly after the passing through the gate on the way out of the city, as Jesus staggered on bearing the crossbeam, his physical strength momentarily gave way, and he fell beneath the weight of his heavy burden. The soldiers shouted at him and kicked him, but he could not arise. When the captain saw this, knowing what Jesus had already endured, he commanded the soldiers to desist. Then he ordered a passerby, one Simon from Cyrene, to take the crossbeam from Jesus' shoulders and compelled him to carry it the rest of the way to Golgotha. And this is a picture of that. This is the gate that they're talking about going through. Right here, the Damascus gate, which went directly to Golgotha.
This man Simon had come all the way from Cyrene in northern Africa to attend the Passover. He was stopping with other Syrians just outside the city walls and was on his way to the temple services in the city when the Roman captain commanded him to carry Jesus' crossbeam. Simon lingered all through the hours of the Master's death on the cross, talking with many of his friends and with his enemies. After the resurrection and before leaving Jerusalem, he became a valiant believer in the gospel of the kingdom. And when he returned home, he led his family into the heavenly kingdom. His two sons, Alexander and Rufus, became very effective teachers of the new gospel in Africa. Simon never knew that Jesus, whose burden he bore, and the Jewish tutor who once befriended his injured son were the same person.
Unusual, isn't it? Stephen.
Okay. It was shortly after 9 o'clock when this procession of death arrived at Golgotha, and the Roman soldiers set themselves about the task of nailing the two brigands and the Son of Man to their respective crosses.
You know, in this narrative, it seems to appear that they nailed the brigands on there too, on their crosses. They didn't just tie them up there like some people say. They actually nailed them just like they did Jesus. So, Millie.
Number 2, the crucifixion. The soldiers first bound the master's arms with cords to the crossbeam, and then they nailed his hands to the wood. When they had hoisted this crossbeam up on the post, and after they had nailed it securely to the upright timber of the cross, they bound and nailed his feet to the wood, using one long nail to penetrate both feet. The upright timber had a large peg inserted at the proper height, which served as a sort of saddle for supporting the body weight. The cross was not high, the master's feet being only about 3 feet from the ground. He was therefore able to hear all that was said of him in derision and could plainly see the expression on the faces of all of those who thoughtlessly mocked him. And also could those present easily hear all that Jesus said during these 3 hours of lingering torture and slow death.
It wasn't 3 hours though, these hours.
Yeah.
How many hours was it?
I think it was 5.5, if I remember correctly. I think they nailed him up about between 9 and 9:30, and he expired sometime after 2 o'clock, right before 3. 3 is when the sandstorm came through and darkened the skies. It was the custom to remove all clothes from those who were to be crucified, but since the Jews greatly objected to the public exposure of the naked human form, the Romans always provided a suitable loincloth for all persons crucified at Jerusalem. Accordingly, after Jesus' clothes had been removed, he was garbed before he was put on the cross. And except for the height of the cross, this is probably most like what it really looked like. The crosses are a little too high. That's probably more like 6 foot high. If they were more like 3 foot off the ground.
Crucifixion was resorted to in order to provide a cruel and lingering punishment, the victim sometimes not dying for several days. There was considerable crucifixion in Jerusalem, and there existed a society of Jewish women who always sent a representative to crucifixions for the purpose of offering drugged wine to the victims in order to lessen his suffering. But when Jesus tasted the
Narcoticized
wine, as thirsty as he was, he refused to drink it. The master chose to tame his human consciousness until the very end. He desired to meet death even in this cruel and inhuman form, and conquer it by voluntary submission to the full human experience.
This is them offering the wine. Stephen.
Okay. Before Jesus was put on his cross, the two brigands had already been placed on their crosses, all the while cursing and spitting upon the executioners. Jesus' only words as they nailed him to the crossbeam were, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." He could not have so mercifully and lovingly interceded for his executioners if such thoughts of affectionate devotion had not been the mainspring of all of his life of unselfish service. The ideas, motives, and longing of a lifetime are openly revealed in a crisis.
Millie, you able to go on, Millie?
After the master was hoisted on the cross, the captain nailed the title up above his head and read in 3 languages, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The Jews were infuriated by this believed insult, but Pilate was chafed by their disrespectful manner. He felt he had been intimidated and humiliated, and he took this method to obtain petty revenge. He could have written Jesus a rebel, but he well knew these Jerusalem Jews detested the very name of Nazareth, and he was determined thus to humiliate them. He knew that they would also be cut to the very quick by seeing this executed Galilean called the King of the Jews.
This is another picture of the crucifixion. Many of the Jewish leaders, when they learned how Pilate had sought to deride them by placing this inscription on the cross of Jesus, hastened out to Golgotha, but they dared not attempt to remove it since the Roman soldiers were standing on guard. Not being able to remove the title, these leaders mingled with the crowd and did their utmost to incite derision and ridicule, lest give any serious regard to the inscription. They would not even let him die in peace, did they?
The Apostle John, with Mary, the mother of Jesus, Ruth, and Jude, arrived on the scene just after Jesus had been hoisted to his position on the cross, and just as the captain was nailing the title above the master's head. John was the only one of the 11 apostles to witness the crucifixion, and even he was not present all the time, since he ran into Jerusalem to bring back his mother and her friends, soon after he had brought Jesus' mother to the scene.
Stephen.
As Jesus saw his mother with John and his brother and sister, he smiled but said nothing. Meanwhile, the 4 soldiers assigned to the master's crucifixion, as was the custom, had divided his clothes among them, one taking the sandals, one the turban, one the girdle, and the 4th the cloak. This left the tunic, or seamless vestment, reaching down to near the knees, to be cut up into 4 pieces. But when the soldiers saw what an unusual garment it was, they decided to cast lots for it. Jesus looked down on them while they divided his garments, and the thoughtless crowd jeered at him.
Millie, would you take the next one?
It was well that the Roman soldiers took possession of the master's clothing. Otherwise, if his followers had gained possession of these garments, they would have been tempted to resort to superstitious relic worship. The master desired that his followers should have nothing material to associate with his life on earth. He wanted to leave mankind only the memory of a human life dedicated to the high spiritual ideal of being consecrated to doing the Father's will.
And what did we do? We tried to create relics out of the chalice, right, that they drank for, the Holy Grail, as they say, right? They tried to make a big deal out of his grave cloths, which we know were tossed over a ravine, and everything associated. The crossbeam itself, the mother of one of the emperors went to Jerusalem and dug up something on Golgotha, which they claimed to be the crossbeam of Christ. And we know that all these things Jesus would not have approved of at all, right? We human beings like to have things to idol worship, right? Constantine's mother, yeah. Oh, that's me, isn't it? This one.
Mm-hmm.
Those who saw the crucifixion. At about 9:30 this Friday morning, Jesus was hung upon the cross. Before 11 o'clock, upward of 1,000 persons had assembled to witness the spectacle of the crucifixion of the Son of Man. Throughout these dreadful hours, the unseen host of the universe stood in silence while they gazed upon this extraordinary phenomena of the Creator as he was dying the death of the creature, even the most ignoble death of a condemned criminal. So notice here it says it was about 9:30 that they hung him on the cross, right? If y'all remember that. They're going to tell us when he died a little later. And this is another picture of Christ on the cross.
Standing near the cross at one time or another during the crucifixion were Mary, Ruth, Jude, John, Salome, John's mother, and a group of earnest women believers, including Mary, the wife of Clopas, the sister of Jesus' mother, Mary Magdalene, and sister of Mary, of Jesus' mother, Mary Magdalene and Rebecca, one time of Sepphoris. These and other friends of Jesus held their peace while they witnessed his great patience and fortitude and gazed upon his intense sufferings.
And this is where they tried to give him a drink with the sponge. Stephen.
Okay. Many who passed by wagged their heads and rallying at him said, "You who would destroy the temple and build it again in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, why do you not come down from your cross?" In like manner, some of the rulers of the Jews mocked him, saying, "He saved others, but himself he cannot save." Others said, "If you are the King of the Jews, come down from the cross, and we will believe in you." And later on they mocked him the more, saying he trusted in God to deliver him. He even claimed to be the Son of God. Look at him now, crucified between two thieves. Even the two thieves also rallied at him and cast reproach upon him.
Millie.
Inasmuch as Jesus would make no reply to their taunts, and since it was nearing noontime of this special preparation day, by 11:30, most of those jesting and jeering crowd had gone its way. Less than 50 persons remained on the scene. The soldiers now prepared to eat lunch and drink their cheap sour wine as they settled down for the long death watch. As they partook of the wine, they derisively ordered a toast to Jesus, saying, "Hail and good fortune to the King of the Jews." And they were astonished at the master's tolerant regard of their ridicule and mocking.
When Jesus saw them eat and drink, he looked down upon them and said, "I thirst." When the captain of the guard heard Jesus say, "I thirst," he took some of the wine from his bottle and putting it on a saturated sponge stopper upon the end of a javelin, raised it to Jesus so he could moisten his parched lips.
Jesus had purposed to live without resort to a supernatural power, and he likewise elected to die as an ordinary mortal upon the cross. He had lived as a man, and he would die as a man, doing the Father's will.
Stephen.
Okay. 4. The thief on the cross. One of the brigands rallied at Jesus, saying, "If you are the Son of God, why do you not save yourself and us?" But when he had reproached Jesus, the other thief, who had many times heard the master teach, said, "Do you have no fear even of God? Do you not see that we are suffering justly for our deeds, but that this man suffers unjustly? Better that we should seek forgiveness for our sins and salvation for our souls." When Jesus heard the thief say this, He turned his face toward him and smiled approvingly. When the malefactor saw the face of Jesus turned toward him, he mustered up his courage, fanned the flickering flame of his faith, and said, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And then Jesus said, Verily, verily, I say to you today, you shall sometime be with me in paradise.
That's a pretty good indication that he means what he says. Millie.
The master had time amidst the pangs of mortal death to listen to the faith confession of a believing brigand. When this thief reached out for salvation, he found deliverance. Many times before this, he had been constrained to believe in Jesus, but only in these last hours of consciousness did he turn with a whole heart toward the master's teaching. When he saw the manner in which Jesus faced death upon the cross, this thief could no longer resist the conviction that this Son of Man was indeed the Son of God.
Saving people even to the last minute, wasn't he? During this episode of the conversion and reception of the thief into the kingdom by Jesus, the Apostle John was absent, having gone into the city to bring his mother and her friends to the scene of the crucifixion. Luke subsequently heard this story from the converted Roman captain of the guard.
The Apostle John told about the crucifixion as he remembered the event 2/3 of a century after its occurrence. The other records were based upon the recital of the Roman centurion on duty, who, because of what he saw and heard, subsequently believed in Jesus and entered into the full fellowship of the kingdom of heaven on earth.
So the captain was converted, right? Stephen.
This young man, Lieutenant Brigard, had been led, go ahead, Braggart, had been led into the life of violence and wrongdoing by those who extolled such a career of robbery as an effective patriotic protest against political oppression and social injustice. And this sort of teaching, plus the urge for adventure, led many otherwise well-meaning youths to enlist in these daring expeditions of robbery. This young man had looked upon Barabbas as a hero. Now he saw that he had been mistaken. Here on the cross beside him, he saw a really great man, a true hero. Here was a hero who fired his zeal and inspired his highest ideas of moral self-respect and quickened all his ideals of courage, manhood, and bravery. In beholding Jesus, there sprang up in his heart the overwhelming sense of love, loyalty, and genuine greatness. Sorry about that.
Right. Millie?
And if any other person among the jeering crowd had experienced the birth of faith within his soul and had appealed to the mercy of Jesus, he would have been received with the same loving consideration that was displayed toward the believing brigand.
Just after the repentant thief heard the master's promise that they should sometimes meet in paradise, John returned from the city, bringing with him his mother and a company of almost a dozen women believers. John took up his position near Mary, the mother of Jesus, supporting her. Her son Jude stood on the other side. As Jesus looked down upon this scene, it was noontide, and he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." And speaking to John, he said, "My son, behold your mother." And then he addressed them both, saying, "I desire that you depart from this place." And so John and Jude led Mary away from Golgotha. John took the mother of Jesus to the place where he tarried in Jerusalem and then hastened back to the scene of the crucifixion. After the Passover, Mary returned to Bethsaida, and where she lived at John's home for the rest of her natural life. Mary did not live quite 1 year after the death of Jesus. And this supposedly is a picture of Mary's funeral.
After Mary left, the other women withdrew for a short distance and remained in attendance upon Jesus until he expired on the cross. They were yet standing by when the body of the Master was taken down for burial.
And this is Jesus being taken down, and this one too, and this one. Stephen.
5. Last hour on the cross. Although it was early in the season for such a phenomena, shortly after 12 o'clock, the sky darkened by reason of the fine sand in the air. The people of Jerusalem knew that this meant the coming of one of those hot wind sandstorms from the Arabian desert. Before 1 o'clock, the sky was so dark the sun was hid, and the remainder of the crowd hastened back to the city. When the Master gave up his life shortly after this hour, less than 30 people were present. Only the 13 Roman soldiers and a group of about 15 believers. These believers were all women except 2, Jude, Jesus' brother, and John Zebedee, who returned to the scene just before the Master expired.
Millie.
Roger, I think I'll let you read this one.
Okay. Shortly after 1 o'clock, amidst the increasing darkness of the fierce sandstorm, Jesus began to fail in human consciousness. His last words of mercy, forgiveness, and admonition had been spoken. His last wish concerning the care of his mother had been expressed. During this hour of approaching death, the human mind of Jesus resorted to the repetition of many passages in the Hebrew scriptures, particularly the Psalms. The last conscious thought of the human Jesus was concerned with the repetition in his mind of a portion of the book of Psalms, now known as the 20th, 21st, and 22nd Psalms. While his lips would often move, he was too weak to utter the words of these passages, as he so well knew by heart and would pass through his mind. Only a few times did those standing by catch some utterances such as, "I know the Lord will save his anointed. Your hand shall find out all my enemies. And my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus did not for one moment entertain the slightest doubt that he had lived in accordance with the Father's will, and he never doubted that he was now laying down his life in the flesh in accordance with the Father's will. He did not feel that the Father had forsaken him. He was merely reciting his vanishing consciousness many scriptures, among them this 22nd Psalm, which begins with, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And this happened to be one of the 3 passages which were spoken with sufficient clearness to be heard by those standing by. So y'all think about this. This was from 9 o'clock till a little after 1, right? So it was about 4 hours, a little bit more than 4 hours. Right? Right.
The last request which the Lord Jesus made of his fellows was about 1:30 o'clock, when a second time he said, "I thirst." And the same captain of the guard again moistened his lips with the same sponge wet in the sour wine, in those days commonly called vinegar.
Stephen.
The sandstorm grew in intensity, and the heavens increasingly darkened. Still, the soldiers and a small group of believers stood by. The soldiers crouched near the cross, huddled together to protect themselves from the cutting sand. The mother of John and others watched from a distance, where they were somewhat sheltered by an overhanging rock. When the Master finally breathed his last, there were present at the foot of his cross John Zebedee, his brother Jude, his sister Ruth, Mary Magdalene, and Rebecca, one time of Sepphoris.
Roger, you can take it.
Okay. It was just before 3 o'clock when Jesus, with a loud voice, cried out, "It is finished. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And when he had thus spoken, he bowed his head and gave up the life struggle. When the Roman centurion saw how Jesus died, he smote his breast and said, "This was indeed a righteous man. Truly, he must have been a son of God." And from that hour, he began to believe in Jesus. So it was just before 3 o'clock, almost 5 hours, 4.5, 5 hours. You all right, dear?
Jesus died royally as he had lived. He freely admitted his kingship and remained master of the situation throughout the tragic day. He went willingly to his ignominious death, and after he had provided for the safety of his chosen apostles, he wisely restrained Peter's troublemaking violence and provided that John might revere him right up to the end of his mortal existence. He revealed his true nature to the murderous Sanhedrin and reminded Pilate of the source of his sovereign authority as a son of God. He started out to Golgotha bearing his own crossbeam and finished up his loving bestowal by handing over his spirit of mortal requirement to the paradise Father. And after such a life and at such a death, the Master could truly say, "It is finished."
What is finished here? What's he talking about? He's talking about not only life, but the whole bestowal experience, right? Right. Stephen.
Because this was a preparation day for both the Passover and the Sabbath, the Jews did not want these bodies to be exposed on Golgotha. Therefore, they went before Pilate asking that the legs of these three men be broken, that they be dispatched, so that they could be taken down from their crosses and cast into a criminal burial pit before sundown. When Pilate heard this request, he forthwith sent 3 soldiers to break the legs and dispatch Jesus and the 2 brigands.
When these soldiers arrived at Golgotha, they did accordingly to the 2 thieves, but they found Jesus already dead, much to their surprise. However, in order to make sure of his death, one of the soldiers pierced his left side with a spear. Though it was common for the victims of crucifixion to linger alive upon the cross for even 2 or 3 days, the overwhelming emotional agony and acute spiritual anguish of Jesus brought an end to his mortal life in the flesh a little less than 5.5 hours. That's where I got that in the first place, with the 5.5 hours, right?
Mm-hmm.
6. After the crucifixion, in the midst of the darkness of the sandstorm, about 3 o'clock, David Zebedee sent out the last of the messengers, bearing the news of the Master's death. The last of his runners he dispatched to the home of Martha and Mary in Bethany, where he supposed the mother of Jesus stopped with the rest of her family.
After the death of the Master, John sent the woman in charge of Jude to the home of Elijah Mark, where they tarried over the Sabbath day. John himself, being well known by this time to the Roman centurion, remained at Golgotha until Joseph and Nicodemus arrived on the scene, with an order from Pilate authorizing them to take possession of the body of Jesus.
Isn't it interesting that Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, both Pharisees of the Sanhedrin, were the ones that asked for the body of Jesus so they could protect it from the Sanhedrin? Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
Pilate signed the order too.
Yeah.
He did what he could, even though it was for some vengeance.
Yeah.
He still did it.
He did.
It was the right thing to do.
And this was an example of the body of Jesus. I don't even remember who's that.
Roger,
Yeah, go ahead.
you
Nick.
can end this one.
Thus ended a day of tragedy and sorrow for the vast universe whose myriads of intelligences had shuddered at the shocking spectacle of the crucifixion of the human incarnation of the beloved sovereign. They were stunned by this exhibition of mortal callousness and human perversity. And that ends the crucifixion. Let's say a little prayer and we'll close for tonight. I think I'll pray, close this one. Father, this was a very hard paper to get through. We're all embarrassed that the human race would crucify their own creator, the Son of God. We're embarrassed that the Pharisees could be this cruel, and the human beings associated with could be this cruel, including Pilate. We're sorry as a human race. We're sorry as a people. We're sorry as the people of the planet. The only good thing about this whole situation is the fact that Jesus will raise himself from the dead after this was over. And we are grateful that you give us a son that loved us so much that he went through all this agony that we could understand what we go through death, and that we will again rise and we will go to the mansion worlds and stand beside him at some time. We want to thank you for this knowledge. We want to thank you for these people that come and listen to this. We want to thank you for this group and their families. And please allow us to do your will in our lives, that we might serve you better. We thank you, and we thank Jesus and Michael, Son of God, Sovereign of our universe, for his sacrifice and his being willing to go this far to provide a way and a door for us to continue on. We thank you, and we give you the praise in the Son Michael, Jesus of Nazareth. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, let me stop the video here.